The crystalline observation deck of the Star Weaver glittered with the light of distant stars as tactical officer Sarah Chen watched her alien crewmates participate in their monthly combat trials. The viewing gallery normally held dozens of spectators, but today she sat alone, her dark eyes fixed on the training arena below where Commander Kazoth, a towering Mantidian, demonstrated what their species considered basic self-defense moves. The movements were beautiful in their brutality, precise strikes that could shatter exoskeletons, defensive stances that utilized all four of their arms to the maximum effect. Sarah's fingers twitched unconsciously, mentally cataloging each technique. After 6 months aboard the Galactic Coalition's most advanced warship, she still wasn't permitted to participate in these sessions. Not because she lacked the rank or clearance, but because she was human. Observing again, Officer Chen. The melodic voice of Science Officer Zura floated through the air. The Luminion's bioluminescent patterns shifted in what Sarah had learned to recognize as mild concern. You know, these exercises are designed for species with different physiological capabilities. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. Different doesn't always mean superior, Zara. Humans have our own ways of handling combat situations. Of course, Zyra's patterns flickered in what might have been embarrassment. I didn't mean to imply. It's just that the Coalition has protocols in place to protect more vulnerable species. The word vulnerable hung in the air like a challenge. Below, Kazoth's trainees had moved on to advanced maneuvers, their chidnous bodies flowing through combat forms that seemed to defy gravity. Sarah watched as a young Mantidian recruit attempted a complex defensive role, only to stumble and expose their flank. Kazoth's disappointed clicking echoed through the arena. You know, Sarah said carefully, humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. Zyra's translation matrix hummed as it processed the idiom. I'm not familiar with these dogs, but I believe I understand the sentiment. Still, sentiment doesn't change physical limitations. Sarah stood, her hand brushing against the small device in her pocket, our recent purchase from the station's marketplace. Maybe it's time we showed you another human saying. Work smarter, not harder. The next morning, Sarah arrived early to the training deck, before the regular sessions began. She had spent hours studying the station's regulations, and while there were countless rules about safety protocols and proper procedures, she found nothing that explicitly forbidden her from using the facility during off hours. The training arena's environmental controls hummed to life as she entered, adjusting the atmosphere and gravity to standard Coalition settings. Sarah began her warm-up routine, a mixture of traditional Earth martial arts and adaptations she developed for low-gravity environments. As she moved, she deliberately activated the arena's recording systems. If she was going to challenge the status quo, she wanted witnesses. She had just finished her basic forms when the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Kazoth's massive frame filled the doorway, mandibles clicking in what Sarah had learned to recognize as surprise. Officer Chen, this area is not scheduled for use at this time. The commander's translator rendered their clicks into standard Coalition speech. No scheduled use means it's available for individual practice, according to Section 47B of Station Protocols. Sarah replied, continuing her stretches. Unless you're ordering me to leave. Kazoth's antennae twitched, a gesture Sarah had learned indicated internal conflict. Your species' skeletal structure is not rated for our training regimens. The medical division has been quite clear on this matter. Sarah pulled out the small device from her pocket. Then let me show you a human training regimen. She activated the laser pointer, sending a small red dot dancing across the arena floor. This is how we learn precision targeting and rapid response times on Earth. Kazoth's compound eyes tracked the dot with startling intensity. Sarah noticed their hunting instincts engaging before they could suppress them. A subtle shift in posture, a tightening of their primary striking arms. She moved the dot in increasingly complex patterns, demonstrating how it could be used to practice footwork, timing, and spatial awareness. A simple light projection. Kazoth's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of dismissal and curiosity in their clicks. This is a child's toy. Sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective, Sarah replied, deactivating the pointer. Humans don't have natural weapons like mandibles or claws. We had to learn to use our minds first, our bodies second. Every tool, every technique we developed had to compensate for our physical limitations. She gestured to the arena's holographic interface. Your training programs focus on power, on using your natural advantages. But what happens when those advantages are neutralized? When you face an opponent who's adapted to being the physically weaker species? Kazoth remained silent for a long moment, their antennae swaying in thought. Finally, they stepped fully into the arena. Show me. Sarah activated the laser pointer again, this time programming it to follow one of the standard coalition training patterns. The red dot wove through the air in the same sequence their recruits had struggled with yesterday. Try to catch it, she challenged. But remember, in a real fight, letting your instincts take over completely can be fatal. What followed was unlike any training session the Starweaver had ever seen. The mighty Mantidian commander, terror of 3 space sectors, found themselves thoroughly challenged by a simple beam of light. Each time their natural speed and precision nearly caught the dot, Sarah would change the pattern, forcing them to think rather than simply react. As the session continued, other crew members began to filter in for their regular training time. They found their commander and the human tactical officer engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate dance, Kazoth's movements becoming more controlled, more strategic with each passing minute. This, Kazoth finally said, mandibles clicking in what might have been approval, has possibilities. Sarah smiled, tucking the laser pointer away. That was just the warm-up. Wait until I show you what humans can do with a simple piece of string. The news spread quickly through the ship. The human officer had not only gained access to the training arena, but had somehow earned the respect of Commander Kazoth. By mid-cycle, Sarah found herself fielding questions from curious crew members about human training methodologies. Even Zira had approached her, bioluminescent patterns shifting in what appeared to be excitement rather than concern. As she prepared for her evening shift at Tactical, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had taken the first step toward changing perceptions, but the real challenge lay ahead. Tomorrow, she would formally request to participate in the combat trials, not as an observer, but as an instructor. After all, humanity hadn't survived and thrived among the stars by accepting limitations. They had done it by turning those very limitations into advantages. And Sarah Chen was about to teach an entire coalition warship exactly how humanity had earned its place among the stars. The Starweaver's combat arena buzzed with an energy Sarah hadn't felt since her academy days. Word of her unconventional training session with Commander Kazoth had spread through the ship like a quantum wave, drawing a crowd that filled the observation deck to capacity. Representatives from every coalition species aboard had gathered to witness what many considered either a bold innovation or a spectacular mistake in the making. Sarah stood before the combat trials board, her formal request for instructor status displayed on the holoscreen behind her. Commander Kazoth sat at the center, flanked by Lieutenant Valixar, a Serpentian combat specialist, and Dr. Nixus, the ship's Aetherian chief medical officer, whose gaseous form swirled with skepticism. Your proposal is unprecedented. Dr. Nixus's translator rendered their atmospheric vibrations into speech. Human physiology lacks the natural defenses of most coalition species. The medical risks alone are precisely why this is necessary. Sarah interrupted, her voice steady. Humans have always faced opponents stronger, faster, or better armored than ourselves. We survived and thrived because we learned to adapt, to think differently about combat and defense. Valixar's scales shifted in what Sarah recognized as amusement. And you believe your light projection toys can adequately prepare our warriors for real combat situations? Sarah activated her datapad, projecting a holographic display of Earth's historical warfare evolution. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our physical capabilities. It's our ability to turn disadvantages into advantages. Every tool, every strategy we developed came from necessity. The images shifted, showing ancient hunters using simple machines to take down massive prey, medieval armies employing tactical formations, and modern combat simulators. What you see as teats, we developed as training tools. They teach timing, precision, and most importantly, the ability to think beyond pure instinct. Kazoth's antennae twitched thoughtfully. You propose to integrate these methods into our standard training protocols. I propose to demonstrate them first, Sarah replied, pulling out not just her laser pointer, but an array of seemingly simple objects she'd replicated in the ship's fabrication bay. Set up your most challenging combat scenario. Let me show you how human ingenuity can overcome physical limitations. The arena's environmental controls hummed to life, generating the holographic obstacles and targets of the Coalition's most advanced combat trial. Sarah had studied recordings of previous attempts. None had completed it with a perfect score, not even Kizoth. The labyrinth of shadows. Valixar announced, scales rippling with anticipation. Designed to test reflexes, strategy, and combat prowess against multiple opponent types. No human has ever attempted this course. Sarah stepped into the starting position, her simple tools secured to her belt. The assembled crowd fell silent as the countdown began. In the observation deck, Zyra's bioluminescence pulsed with nervous energy. The scenario activated with a burst of light, and Sarah's world transformed into a maze of shifting shadows and holographic threats. Traditional Coalition training emphasized direct confrontation, meet force with greater force. But Sarah had spent months studying their patterns, finding the gaps in their thinking. Her first opponent materialized, a holographic Mantidian warrior twice her size. Instead of attempting to match its strength, Sarah deployed a small mirror sphere, splitting her laser pointer's beam into dozens of moving points. The warrior's combat programming triggered its hunting instincts, creating a moment of confusion she used to slip past. In the control room, Zoth's mandibles clicked rapidly. Fascinating. She's exploiting our natural predatory responses. The course grew more challenging. A serpentine ambush from above was countered with a quick-deploying net of ultralight fibers, a tool inspired by ancient Earth spider webs. A charging Taurian warrior found itself tangled in a bola made of simple magnetic spheres connected by energy threads. She's not just avoiding confrontation, Dr. Nixus observed, their gaseous forms swirling with interest. She's using the environment and our own biology against us. Sarah moved through the course like water finding its path, never meeting force with force, always finding the indirect solution. When faced with a massive barrier, she didn't try to break through. She created a series of distractions that revealed the barrier's structural weak points. The final challenge approached, a simultaneous attack from multiple opponents in a zero-gravity environment. Previous participants had treated it as a test of raw combat ability. Sarah saw it differently. She activated her final tool, a simple prism array that split her laser pointer's beam into a complex web of light. The holographic opponents, programmed to react to threat patterns, found their targeting systems confused by the seemingly random yet precisely calculated pattern of lights. In the chaos she created, Sarah navigated through the zero-gravity space using minimal movements, letting her opponents' own momentum work against them. One by one, they tangled themselves in her web of light and counterforce. The scenario ended with Sarah touching the final target point. The arena fell silent as the holographics faded. On the main display, her score flashed. A perfect run, completed in record time. Well, Valixar broke the silence, scales now showing patterns of respect. It seems we have underestimated both human ingenuity and the combat applications of toys. Kizoth stood, their massive frame casting a shadow over the control panel. Officer Chen has demonstrated that effective combat training transcends physical capabilities. The Coalition's strength lies in diversity of approach, not merely diversity of species. Dr. Nix's form rippled in what might have been enthusiasm. The medical implications are fascinating. Training methods that emphasize strategic thinking over physical risk could reduce combat injuries significantly. Sarah holstered her laser pointer, her expression professional but her eyes bright with triumph. This was just a demonstration. Each of these tools can be adapted for different species, different combat styles. Imagine combining Mantidian reflexes with human strategic thinking, or Serpentian agility with our pattern recognition training. The observation deck erupted in discussion, dozens of voices and translators overlapping as the implications sank in. Sarah caught sight of Zira in the crowd, the Luminian's patterns now showing unmistakable excitement. As the board members conferred, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had done more than prove humans could handle coalition combat training. She had shown them an entirely new way of thinking about combat itself. The next challenge would be adapting these methods for each species' unique capabilities, but that was exactly the kind of problem humans excelled at solving. After all, innovation often came not from having every advantage, but from learning to work around having none at all. The Starweaver's recreational deck had never seen so much activity during Gamma Shift. 3 weeks after Sarah's demonstration in the combat arena, the space had been transformed into what she affectionately called the Tactical Innovation Center. In reality, it looked more like a bizarre hybrid of a training facility and an Earth playground. Mantidian warriors practiced precision strikes using elaborate string games derived from ancient Earth cat's cradle patterns. A group of Serpentian scouts twisted through a modified version of what humans would recognize as a laser maze, learning to control their instinctive responses to light and movement. Even the gaseous Aetherians had found value in Sarah's methods, using prismatic arrays to practice maintaining complex form patterns under stress. Sarah stood at her makeshift instructor station, making adjustments to a holographic obstacle course, while Commander Kizoth observed nearby. The Mantidians' initial skepticism had evolved into genuine curiosity, especially after seeing how their younger warriors were adapting to the new training methods. Your species' obsession with play remains perplexing, Kizoth commented, watching a junior officer navigate a complex pattern of moving lights. Yet I cannot deny the results. Our reaction times have improved by 12% across all divisions. Play is how humans learn, Sarah explained, finalizing the course modifications. It's how we test boundaries, develop skills, and most importantly, learn to think creatively under pressure. When you're having fun, you're more willing to try new approaches. A commotion from the far corner drew their attention. Lieutenant Valixar had become entangled in what appeared to be a giant version of an Earth string game. Instead of showing frustration, the Serpentian was laughing, a sound that would have been unthinkable in traditional training. That's another benefit, Sarah noted. When you remove the fear of failure, people take more risks, learn faster. Watch this. She activated her command console, subtly altering the pattern of the string maze. Valixar, instead of retreating, immediately began testing different approaches to the new configuration. Dr. Nixis drifted into the training area, their gaseous form condensed into what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of an excited state. Officer Chen, your latest adaptation for Aetherian form control training has produced remarkable results. Our medical team is reporting a 30% reduction in form strain injuries. Sarah beamed with pride. Creating training methods for a gaseous species had been her biggest challenge yet, but watching the Aetherians master complex prismatic patterns had made the countless hours of research worth it. I've been meaning to ask, Nixis continued, their form rippling with curiosity. How did humans develop such diverse training methods without natural predatory instincts to build upon? We did have predatory instincts, Sarah corrected, pulling up historical data on her pad. They were just different. Humans were persistence hunters. We couldn't outfight our prey, so we learned to outlast them. Everything we developed came from needing to be smarter, not stronger. The conversation was interrupted by an excited chirping from the junior officers section. A young Mantidian had just completed their first perfect run through the advanced reaction course. using a modified version of what was essentially a human jump rope to time their movements. Speaking of persistence, Kizoth observed, their mandibles clicking in what Sarah now recognized as pride. Your dedication to adapting these methods for each species is remarkable. Sarah watched as Zora, who had become one of her most enthusiastic supporters, demonstrated a new light pattern exercise to a group of mixed-species trainees. The Luminians' natural bioluminescence had proven invaluable in developing training techniques that crossed species barriers. That's another human trait, Sarah explained. We're social creatures. Our greatest achievements always came from working together, learning from each other. Every tool, every technique I've shown you was built on thousands of years of human innovation and cooperation. The ship's intercom system chimed, announcing the start of beta shift. As the training area began to clear, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Officers of different species were talking, laughing, sharing tips about the various exercises. The rigid social barriers that had once defined coalition ship life were beginning to blur. You've created more than just a training program, Kizoth noted, their antennae waving thoughtfully. You've created a space where species can interact without the weight of traditional hierarchies. Sarah nodded, already making notes for tomorrow's sessions. On Earth, we had a saying, the more we sweat in training, the less we bleed in battle. But it's not just about the physical preparation. It's about building trust, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses, learning to work together. As she spoke, she watched a young Aetherian helping a Serpentian officer adjust their form for a new exercise. 6 weeks ago, such cooperation would have been unthinkable. Now it was becoming routine. Perhaps, Kizoth said slowly, this is why the Coalition has never fully understood humans. We saw your physical limitations as weaknesses to be protected. We never considered that those very limitations might be the source of your greatest strengths. Sarah was about to respond when her pad chimed with a priority alert. The message was brief but clear. Long-range sensors had detected an anomaly in a nearby sector. Something was approaching Coalition space, something that didn't match any known signature patterns. She looked up at Kizoth, seeing in their posture that they'd received the same alert. Looks like we might get to test these new training methods sooner than we expected. The commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been anticipation. Then we should be grateful that we now have a human perspective on how to handle the unexpected. As the alert status indicators began to shift throughout the ship, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Whatever was coming, the Starweaver's crew was more prepared than ever, not because they were stronger or faster, but because they had learned to think differently, to work together in new ways. After all, facing the unknown was something humans had been practicing for their entire history. Now it was time to show the Coalition exactly what that practice could achieve. The Starweaver's bridge hummed with tension as the unknown contact drew closer to Coalition space. Sarah stood at her tactical station, surrounded by holographic displays showing sensor data that seemed to defy conventional analysis. The object, if it could be called that, appeared to shift between states of matter, making standard targeting systems useless. Multiple signatures detected, reported Zaira from the science station, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with concentration. The entity appears to be playing with our sensor arrays. Each time we adjust, it changes frequency. Commander Kizoth's antennae twitched as they processed this information. Hostile intent. Unknown, Sarah replied, her mind racing through the patterns she was seeing. Something about the contact's behavior seemed familiar, not threatening, but it's testing us. Like a predator testing prey's defenses, but there's more to it than that. The massive view screen showed only distorted space where the anomaly should be. Traditional Coalition protocol would have already labeled this an invasion attempt, but Sarah's training sessions had taught the crew to look deeper, to question their instinctive responses. Look at the pattern, Sarah said suddenly, her fingers flying over her console. It's not random. Dr. Nixus, does this movement remind you of anything? The Aetherian medical officer drifted closer to the tactical display, their gaseous form condensing in recognition. The prismatic exercises. The entity is creating similar geometric progressions, but on a quantum scale. Sarah's heart raced as pieces clicked into place. It's not attacking. It's trying to communicate. We're just not speaking its language. She turned to Kizoth. Commander, request permission to attempt contact using the training systems. Kizoth's compound eyes fixed on her for a long moment. Under traditional coalition protocols, such an unorthodox approach would be unthinkable. But these weren't traditional times. Proceed, Officer Chen. Sarah's fingers danced across her console, linking the ship's training holographics to the main systems. Zara, can you sync your bioluminescence with the output? We might need the extra bandwidth. The Luminian officer moved to join her, patterns already shifting to match the computational rhythms. Together, they began projecting complex geometric patterns into space, mimicking the entity's quantum fluctuations but with subtle variations, a cosmic game of call and response. Engineering reports power fluctuations. Valksar announced from their station, scales rippling with tension. The entity is responding. The view screen erupted in a dazzling display of light and energy as the anomaly matched their pattern, then added its own variations. Sarah recognized the behavior from countless training sessions. It was playing with them, learning about them through interaction. It's exactly like the Predator games, she breathed, just on a scale we never imagined. The next hour was unlike anything in Coalition history. Using techniques developed for training exercises, the Starweaver's crew engaged in an increasingly complex dance of light, energy, and geometry with the mysterious entity. Each exchange revealed more about both sides. Remarkable, Dr. Nixus observed, their forms swirling with excitement. It's using variations of quantum states, similar to how our warriors use different combat stances. This isn't just communication. It's a cultural exchange. Sarah watched as patterns she'd originally designed for Etherian form control training were now being used to help decode an alien entity's quantum language. The irony wasn't lost on her. Tools created to bridge gaps between coalition species were now helping them reach across an even greater divide. Multiple smaller entities detected, Zyra reported suddenly. They appear to be emerging from the main anomaly. The view screen showed several smaller quantum distortions separating from the original contact. Instead of approaching aggressively, they began replicating the training patterns, adding their own variations. It was like watching children join a game. They're not hostile, Sarah said with growing certainty. They're curious. Everything we've seen. The testing, the pattern matching, the playful responses. It's all behavior we've observed in our training sessions. They're trying to learn about us the same way we learn about each other. Kizoth's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. A species that communicates through quantum play. If we had followed standard protocols, we would have seen their attempts at contact as aggression. Sarah finished. Just like how the Coalition initially saw human training methods as primitive or ineffective. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the quantum entities began creating increasingly complex patterns, incorporating elements from all the species present. Mantidian precision, Serpentian fluidity, Etherian state shifting, Luminian light play, and human adaptability, all woven together in a cosmic dance of mutual understanding. Send a message to Coalition Command, Kizoth ordered, their voice carrying a new tone of respect. Inform them that we've made first contact with a non-corporeal species using human training methodologies. Sarah couldn't help but smile at the phrasing. 6 months ago, she'd been considered too fragile to participate in combat training. Now her primitive human approaches to learning and communication had helped prevent a potential interstellar incident. We should invite them to join our next training session, she suggested, only half joking. I have a feeling they could teach us some interesting new patterns. As the quantum entities continued their elaborate display, Sarah realized that this encounter would change more than just Coalition first contact protocols. It would fundamentally alter how the Alliance viewed human contributions to interstellar society. After all, sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from strength or advanced technology, but from being willing to turn training into play and play into understanding. 3 months after the quantum entity encounter, the Starweaver's training deck had become a mandatory stop on the Coalition fleet's official tour route. Sarah watched from her usual station as yet another group of wide-eyed officials tried to process what they were seeing. A Mantidian warrior and an Aetherian scientist working together to solve a complex light pattern puzzle, while a team of mixed species practiced reactive movements using what appeared to be elaborate string games. "Quite a change from your first day aboard," Commander Kizoth observed, joining her at the observation point. Their mandibles clicked in what Sarah now knew was their version of proud amusement. "The Coalition Council is still debating whether to classify your training methods as tactical innovations or cultural artifacts." "Why not both?" Sarah replied, adjusting a training sequence for a group of new recruits. "Humans have always believed that the best solutions often serve multiple purposes." The visitor's attention shifted to the center of the deck, where Zara was leading a demonstration of their newest training protocol, one developed in collaboration with their quantum entity contacts. The Luminian's natural bioluminescence synchronized with holographic projections, creating patterns that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The quantum entities are proving to be quite enthusiastic training partners," Kizoth noted. "Their perspective on dimensional thinking has revolutionized our spatial awareness exercises." Sarah smiled, remembering the moment when they'd first established two-way communication with the entities. It turned out that what the Coalition had initially feared as a potential invasion force was actually a research expedition, drawn to their space by the unique energy signatures of their training exercises. "They understand something we've been trying to teach all along," she said, watching a junior officer successfully complete a particularly challenging sequence. "True strength comes from adaptation and cooperation, not just raw power." The ship's intercom chimed softly, and Dr. Nix's voice filled the air. "Officer Chen, the latest data from the Fleet Academy has been processed. Implementation of your training methods has resulted in a 40% reduction in training-related injuries across all species types, while improving combat readiness scores by an average of 28%. The visiting officials murmured in appreciation, their various biological indicators showing signs of impression and surprise. Sarah caught sight of Alexard demonstrating a new technique to a group of cadets, the Serpentian's movements fluid and precise in ways that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "The most significant changes aren't in the numbers," Sarah commented, pulling up a holographic display of fleet-wide social interaction patterns. "Look at the integration metrics. Species that rarely interacted outside of formal duties are now regularly collaborating, sharing ideas, developing new approaches together." Kizoth's antennae waved in agreement. "The Council has noticed. They're particularly interested in how these methods might be applied to diplomatic training. It seems your human tendency to turn everything into a game has applications beyond combat readiness." A commotion from the advanced training area drew their attention. A young Mantidian officer had just completed the Labyrinth of Shadows using a hybrid approach, combining their species' natural combat abilities with human-inspired tactical tools. Their time wasn't just a personal best, it had broken Sarah's record. "Perfect," Sarah said softly, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "That's exactly what we were hoping for." "You're pleased that your record was broken?" one of the visiting officials asked, their translator struggling to convey their confusion. "Of course," Sarah replied. "The goal was never to prove human methods were superior. It was to show how different approaches could be combined to create something better than either could achieve alone." The training deck's main display activated, showing an incoming transmission from the quantum entities. Their patterns had become more structured over the months of interaction, incorporating elements from each Coalition species' communication styles while maintaining their unique quantum properties. "They're early today," Kizoth observed. The joint training session wasn't scheduled for another cycle. "They're excited," Sarah explained, recognizing the pattern variations. They've developed a new training exercise they want to share, something that combines their quantum state manipulation with our physical movement patterns. As the visitors watched in amazement, the quantum entities began demonstrating their new technique. It was beautiful and bizarre. A dance of probability and possibility that challenged everything the Coalition thought they knew about the nature of combat training. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "when I first came aboard, I thought my biggest challenge would be proving that humans could handle Coalition combat training. I never imagined we'd end up redefining what combat training means." Kazov's compound eyes reflected the shifting patterns of quantum light. "Perhaps that is the greatest lesson humans have taught us. True strength lies not in maintaining traditions, but in being willing to evolve them." The Starweaver hummed with energy as crews rotated through their training sessions, each one a living demonstration of how far they'd come. Species that once saw each other as primitive or fragile now worked together seamlessly, each contributing their unique perspectives to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had learned long ago. Sometimes the best way to overcome limitations was to turn them into inspiration. The toys became tools, the games became training, and the barriers between species became bridges. As Sarah began setting up the next training rotation, she caught her reflection in a nearby display panel. The human officer who had once stood alone in the observation deck, watching others train, was now at the center of a revolution in Coalition military and cultural doctrine. All because she dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the simplest solutions were often the best ones. After all, in the vast expanse of space, there was always room for new ways of thinking, new ways of learning, and new ways of playing. And if those new ways happened to make everyone stronger together, well, that was just human nature.